G'day, Pierre here. Today we're discussing chickens and chicken rearing. Okay, so the first thing to do to discuss is possibly housing. I myself have got the standard size chicken coop with an area that's been cordoned off. It's probably not the best scenario. I'm actually renting myself, so it's if I was to do it myself, I'd possibly go into chicken tractoring, free ranging, bearing in mind that if you are going to free range, they do crap everywhere, so if you've got a yard that isn't good for that particular setup, and you may just want to Google some other forms of actually doing this. The coop itself, I've actually used car oil on it to stop the actual possibly, first of all, termites. Termites aren't particularly interested in wood that's been treated with used car oil. And you could also use, if you wanted to go slightly more eco, there are various natural oils you can use available from health food shops. If you want to go that way, I don't think it really has that much of a toxic effect on the chickens. I've used it myself on my chicken coop and my beehive, so I've not really come across any particular negative effects for that. When it comes to the bedding, I myself have used some newspaper scraps. You can use any other dry material, peanut husks, dried leaves. I've experimented with using grass clippings. Possibly the dry stuff, it would be the slightly better one. You can actually see the perches here, and you've got the nesting boxes just in the corner. Also a good idea if you're starting to raise chickens to save some of egg boxes. Either save some which you've had before, or get your friends and family to put some aside for you. All the bedding can be composted afterwards. Probably best to compost their waste and any of their bedding, as the high amounts of nitrogen in their feces is slightly detrimental to applying to garden beds straight off. You probably want to wait a little while till it breaks down before you actually put it onto garden beds and such like. The different methods you can have to actually feed them can be done through just your standard feed. I've got this particular feeder here, which has reconstituted processed food here. If you have a quick look in the top, so there's not much left in there. But this particular feeder has the additional thing of a rain guard here, which will stop the food from getting all the wet, because it will get wet and turn to mush if you leave it like that. If you can source a GMO-free version, then that'd be good. I tend to get the processed stuff myself more because if you have the type with grain and hardened corn in it, I've personally found that they tend to throw it around a bit more. That encourages vermin, and being down under, when you get vermin, rats and mice and stuff, that you also get the snakes that come in tow looking for the actual vermin. So being that we have some of the most venomous snakes in the world, it's probably best to avoid that scenario. They're a particularly easy animal to look after, chickens. Very simple, don't need much. When looking for food scraps for them, you can use kitchen scraps. I myself go dumpster diving, looking for any type of meat which can be fed to them. Also, obviously, lettuce scraps, any type of vegetable really. Bearing in mind that they have beaks, so the tougher the vegetable, the less likely they are to be able to get into that. Try not to feed them avocados. I've heard that it has a toxic effect on them. Potato peel, although I've never actually experienced that myself, but I generally avoid actually giving it to them. Potato peel is supposed to reduce their ability to lay, although I haven't actually had any experience with that either. It's just stuff that you read on the internet. They are quite curious creatures, each having their own type of personality, so they make interesting pets for kids just to learn the process of animals and generally kind of looking after kind of creatures. Plus, if you get the kids involved, they'll be quite interested in seeing, you know, where their food comes from, really. And nothing beats fresh eggs, especially when you think they're actually truly fresh, as opposed to the ones labelled in the shops, which can still be labelled fresh after they're 30 to 60 days old. Bearing that in mind, it's a pretty good source of long-term food, because it's something that remains fresh 30 to 60 days old. Bear in mind, you also don't need to refrigerate them. If they come straight out of the chicken, you can just put them on the countertop, no problem whatsoever. You can save them for a while. I used to mark them before, penciling the date on the actual shell. But generally you find, because they're so delicious, they don't tend to last that long anyway. If in the summertime, when you have longer hours, you will more than likely be handing them out to friends and family. May even be able to have a market for them, be able to sell them. I'd probably not be selling them in marked boxes in that case. I'd probably go for some kind of place where you can source empty unmarked egg boxes for that particular thing. Other things to discuss: size of the fence. In this particular instance, is quite low. They've grown used to being in this particular environment. I've clipped their wings on one side initially to put them off balance when they actually kind of fly. After a while, they become used to staying in a small enclosure, and even though they're capable of actually flying to much higher levels, possibly head height and above, in short bursts, when you get them used to not flying up to that height, it makes it easier for you to actually kind of to have not such a high fencing and stuff. Obviously, depending on your environment, you may or may not need to have different fencing in regards to predators and stuff, but that will have to be something you possibly might have to research yourself. When it comes to introducing new chickens, should you have an established flock, one of the things that you can actually do is, opposed to introducing during the day, which they take a few weeks to re-establish a pecking order, in which the introduced chicken can be harassed for a few weeks. There's a bit of bullying going on, that they tend to be pecked, and there's a loss of a few feathers and stuff. Is to introduce them at night time. If you put them in the coop while the other chickens are sleeping, they tend to wake up thinking that this chicken has been there all along. This brown one, they can see in the distance there, was one I introduced at night time. Being that she's the only brown chicken, you would have thought that she would have been singled out pretty quickly. They just don't remember. They wake up with the chicken in the morning, regardless of what it looks like. They just assume it's been there all the time. A similar one to the other chickens I've actually got, I introduced during the day, and she was hounded for a good few weeks. So it's something to bear in mind when you actually kind of want to expand your flock, let's just say. In terms of feed, also, is that chickens are omnivores. They are not vegetarians. They will eat meat. Some people like to feed them chicken. I try and avoid it if I possibly can. I'm not a big fan of feeding animals their own kind, but they're not particularly fussy birds, but just do what you have to do, really. Like I said, the potato peel you probably want to avoid, and the avocado as well. Aside from that, the other thing that you can actually do is, if you save their shells, if you dry them, you can then stick them in the blender, powder them down to a fine powder, and reintroduce it into their food. This builds up the strength of the actual shell, which may be an issue if there is not enough calcium in the diet, that they have very weak shells, which will make them prone to either be broken whilst in the coop, which may encourage like a bit of feeding their own eggs, which would be a serious problem at that point, because they'd start pecking at their own eggs. Although I have not actually had that myself. Or the other thing is just the breaking apart in your hand. When you pick them up, they tend to have rather weak shells. If you're encountering that kind of problem, you probably want to build up the calcium in their diet. So either do the shell thing, or start introducing kind of like yogurts and stuff that you can source, either free or buy them. I'd probably go for free myself. You can also, if you're interested in like sourcing free food, is to possibly talk to local restaurant managers and staff, possibly dropping off some kind of receptacle or bin just for scraps, just so they can fill them up and you can pick them up and either on a daily or weekly basis. That may be an option. It's not something I've actually tried, but it's an idea that I'd heard of, which is quite good as well. The other thing that you can do is you actually kind of getting any kind of meat that you think is somehow a little bit, say, off. You're not too sure about actually feeding it to the chickens. As opposed to just throwing it away or feeding it to them and taking the chance that it might be slightly rancid. Another option you can use is, I'll show you this one. It's just a temporary one, but essentially it's a can with holes in it, if you can see that. Now essentially you want to stick this on a tripod in the area. That's probably not the best place, that's just an experimental one. You put some meat in that. What it will do is attract the flies. The flies will then lay their eggs. The holes in the can, you may want to go for a slightly bigger tin, will be the place where the maggots exit once they actually reach the larval stage. The chickens might not be able to eat the meat, but they'll quite happily eat the protein of the actual maggots, and if this is a regular thing where it just drops down, they'll see it as another, it will be another free source of food. Okay, to mitigate the smell, you may want to put some dry materials on the top, like say sawdust or straw, something like that, just to kind of absorb the moisture. But the flies will find it and they'll lay their eggs in it, and that's another good method of actually kind of keeping them well fed. There's different issues with the water. If you're giving them water, well, if you're having a receptacle for water, it's probably best to have something a little bit higher up. I've been told on occasion that chickens have a tendency to drown in buckets of water that you actually put down. I've never actually experienced this. Something once again to bear in mind. You may also want to go this way of a chicken nipple, which essentially is just I don't know if you can see that. It's just a metal nipple which the chickens will peck at, and it delivers a small amount of water. This can be kind of glued onto buckets, a 5-gallon bucket or a bottle like I have here. It keeps the water kind of clean, because the chickens tend to throw a lot of stuff around. If you've got a low bowl or receptacle, it will get pretty filthy pretty quickly. So if you're finding they're doing that, either have a raised bucket or introduce something like this in order to kind of avoid the nastiness which they can actually get into the water. I think that's just about it. If there's any comments you'd like to add, give me a thumbs up if possible. And any questions, issues that I've missed, things that I haven't quite explained properly, or questions that you have, just feel free to leave a message in the comments section below. Okay, thanks very much.